Hello and welcome back to the Finish More Music podcast. So we're doing another podcast first, straight off the back of the series idea. This time we are going to enter into what I'm calling a season on the podcast. So if you remember, we had the series called The Creative Calling, one episode every day of the week, and it was kind of like chapters of a book. I'd written an overarching story and journey, if you like, through the chapters of the book. This time we're going for what I'm referring to as a season. And this will still be centered around a single topic, but we'll talk around the core nucleus of the topic. And as well as hearing from me, I'm bringing other guests onto the show as well, who are going to share their experience, their perspectives. They're people who embody the topic so that we can learn much more deeply and get really a sort of enriched and detailed vision of the full picture. The other difference is that this will follow more, let's say, normal podcast schedule. In this case, it's going to be a release bi-weekly. So that's what a season looks like, so you understand where we're heading and what we're doing. So a good question is, what is the topic of this season? Well, it's contribution through art. It's something that I've wanted to explore more deeply for some time. Contribution lifts everyone up. It lifts up the people who are being contributed to, obviously, but also, and this is a point that I think often gets overlooked, it lifts up the individual contributing far more than if they were operating from a place of ego. So if I unpack this a little bit, some of the topics that we'll dive into, I think some of the things that can get in the way of contribution is maybe not knowing how we can contribute. There are such a wide variety of ways, and oftentimes we're contributing without realizing it. And if we realized it, it would add additional inspiration and motivation. We'd see the impact of what we're doing. Another reason is that sometimes we just fall into the trap of undervaluing exactly what we can bring. I see this quite a lot, where people are, I can't really comment or feedback on somebody's music as a basic example, because I'm not that far along with my own music. And yet every individual has spent a life listening to music and are touched by it, and they have emotions about it and feelings. And often that feedback can be even more valuable than someone who may be further along and has got all these filters about, the technicalities of the music. Really, music is about moving someone. And someone who isn't bogged down by all of these technicalities often gives the best feedback. So it's really easy, just with that one example out of 1,000 that we could discuss, to see how it's easy to undervalue ourselves and the impact that we can have. And then there's a real piece that I'm passionate about exploring and unpacking for everybody, which was a revelation for me many years ago when I learned it. And that's how much more expansive and enriching and motivating and fulfilling life becomes acting from a place of service, i.e. towards other people, or we discussed this in the last series, this idea of a greater power being in service of something more than us and having it channel through us. When we operate from that place of service, it's much more expansive versus operating from a place of ego, which is a place of worry and concern usually about ourselves. It can be very small thinking, very suffocating, very anxiety inducing. And that's like, oh, who am I to be able to offer advice or to help or to put my music out into the world? Who am I to send my music to a label? What will they say? If I perform, I'll be laughed at. I'm not good enough. Comparison, and all of those things. And of course, we've all got that voice inside of us. We've all got the ego, the inner bully that talks to us in that way. So unpacking that and seeing the ways we can contribute, understanding our value, and then living from a place of service actually has ginormous benefits, not just for other people, but of course for us. And there's also sort of a payback, if you like, for want of a better word, a feedback loop, the law of Ayni, the law of reciprocity, which is that when we go out into the world and we act from a place of service, we're not bringing our concerns about ourselves into it. Naturally, things come back 2, 3, 4, 5-fold. It's, there isn't a measurement on it, but we discover very, very quickly that there's more of a spiritual, for example, sense of purpose we get more motivation, more clarity. We tend to learn more, particularly because we have other people around us, more technical skills, more compositional skills. It enriches our muse and our inspiration as a music producer. It, of course, opens up connections, industry doors open, and so on and so forth. So it's a win-win-win-win-win topic when we really unpack it and learn more about it. So that's the direction we're going in. And we've got a guest for this episode. Absolutely delighted to have Mark, aka Riigs, his artist name, coming back on the show. He's someone who's very dear to me. He's a good friend, and he leads from a place of heart and a place of contribution. He is an accomplished artist. He's releasing on big labels, forward-thinking labels. His music is always inspiring and following new journeys, pushing new boundaries creatively, musically. He's a real student of the game. He's also a promoter, a live performer, a label owner, a collaborator. Networking ace is the term that I'd put. That's actually selling Mark short, in my opinion. I've been around a lot of people, very fortunate to be around some really gifted entrepreneurs, people in corporate. Mark unquestionably is the best networker I know. Mark knows so many people. He's the guy who walks into a room and when he walks out, he knows absolutely everybody. It's phenomenal. So he has an incredible network of peers and other promoters and artists and label owners, you name it. Mark is so well connected, and a lot of that comes from a place of contribution. He's soon to be a content creator as a writer as well. And the other reason I was very keen to get Mark on the show is he thinks a great deal about contributing and investing in the success of other people. So it made perfect sense to me to tap into his brain, the way he thinks, his experience, and for us to be able to learn not just how Mark contributes, but also, because he attributes so much of his success to that contribution, how the cycle kind of works, how the feedback loop works for him. So you're going to learn how, through contribution and acts of service, this feeds back into Mark and his own artistic journey, how it's led to the creation of lifelong friends, a circle of peers, incredible industry connections, how it generates personal motivation for Mark, and also the fulfillment and the energy that comes from him succeeding while simultaneously lifting up the people around him and opening doors for them, both artistically and in the industry. So there's a lot to get through here. It's a wonderfully enriching and empowering discussion, and I'm so delighted that I got to sit down with Mark. It is the perfect way to kick off this season. So seatbelts on, let's dive in. Mark Allin, welcome back to the FMM podcast.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here.
Yes. So here's a fun fact. I don't know if you know this, but this kind of knocked me off my chair when I saw this. The last time you were on the show was 4 years ago.
It's not possible.
It doesn't feel like it, does it? It feels...
No, it doesn't.
Somewhat absurd.
It does. Yeah, crazy. But yes, in some ways it doesn't feel like it. In other ways, as soon as you think about something like that, you start to fill in the 4 years and you think, actually, quite a lot has happened.
Yeah, and that's going to be what I'm going to ask you. I'm going to do you a favor, though, and remind you of where we were 4 years ago, because if you're anything like me, I mean, I can barely remember where I was 4 days ago. So here are some of the things that we discussed. You had a release coming up on O Records with Eurus. You were exploring disco house, minimal house, progressive house, and piano house at the time.
Nice.
And this was a big breakthrough, was a shift in identity. We talked about the fact that you were now confident and comfortable in your skin, saying, I am a music producer. There'd been that identity shift. So that was I remember, a pivotal point. And then in terms of your goals, one of your goals was to play live.
Yeah, excellent. There you go.
So if that in some way hopefully dates where we were a little bit in your mind, what does life look like now for you as a creative, and maybe some accomplishments and things will come up in that time span as well, both
Yeah.
inside the studio and outside of the studio? What's Mark Allin, aka Riigs, currently doing as a creative?
Um, a lot, a lot of different things. I think I'm going to reference that conversation because I think it's really helpful. At that point, much earlier on this part of the journey, obviously it's a very long journey. I was focused on a few quite specific things like shaping my craft. Um, and it's interesting you mentioned the music I was making, which is not necessarily the music that I love or that I listen to or that I make now, but it's the music I could make. I felt like I had some tools to do it. So I think where I am now in terms of the craft is much closer, but it's always evolving to the kind of music that really excites me. There's obviously connected. It's still electronic music. It has its roots in performance and dance music and clubs, but also in ambient music. But it feels to me like I'm able to explore much more, sort of push at the boundaries of that music. And that takes me into some different, essentially more left field kinds of places. So I'm doing a lot around that sound and building it. And it's come to a good point. I have a release on a label that I wouldn't say targeting, I'd actually say just listening to for a long time, called Taipan Tracks, which is right in that space of kind of left field club music. And I thought, oh, I'm just going to send it. So I sent the EP to the label owner, who answered the next day and said, "This is exactly right. Have you got? Can we make it into an EP?" and so on. So we did that, and that was a great process. Because he is very, it's not particular. He is very thoughtful about what makes music impactful, particularly in a club. He's a working DJ, and that was another step on the way to really to hear somebody who was thinking about only really about the audience, not necessarily about the piece of music in itself, but about its impact. And that really resonated with me. So I'm doing that and continuing to develop that side of the music alongside some other things. I have a number of collabs that I'm pursuing. I'm sure we'll get onto collaboration, that are also the kind of music that really excites me and people that I'm excited to work with as well. And one of those is becoming a live performance as well. So that's exciting, and kind of moving from one sort of electronic music performance, which, if you like, is based around clips and loops and shaping it that way, to much more of a physical performance. So he's a bass player, Dave Norman. We know him well, and a very, very good bass player as well. So having that live, and it sort of led me to kind of see what I can do with some live drumming, rather bizarrely, and vocals. So that's exciting. And that kind of dovetails into one of my other big projects at the moment, which is around the electronic music open mic that three of us put together in Camden, at the famous Dublin Castle in Camden. The other two being Martin Christie and Darren Lawrence. There's not the first electronic music open mic. One of the great stories that you might want to dig into, or even talk to him, actually, Martin Christie founded the EMOM movement. He came up with the idea about 2016 or 17, and he wrote a book called, I think it's called Travels and Electronic Music. And he was traveling and touring and playing, and he had this idea. He went to an open mic, which are typically singer-songwriters, and he had this idea, why doesn't this happen for electronic music? So he did it. He put one on. I think the first one was in Leeds, and it's become a worldwide movement. It's staggering. There are EMOMs on every continent. There's an EMOM every night in the UK somewhere, sometimes multiple EMOMs. But we put together. But there was at this point there was a gap in London. There had been a night and it disappeared. So we started to put it back together. There are now lots of EMOMs in London, and that's become another real string to the bow and the things that I'm doing, because the EMOM obviously it's a platform for performance, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but it's also a platform for enabling as many people as possible to participate, and kind of thinking about gatekeepers and removing gates and so on. So that's happening. We're applying for some funding so that we can really give it some support and some scope and scale, and see if we can connect it to. We're talking to a couple of music education colleges in London, see if we can tie it in with development of the next generation. So that's happening. I've got a few gigs coming up, including the one with Dave, the bass player. In fact, several with Dave. So that's great. The label that I set up with Jeffrey Raat, Scanner in Amsterdam, probably about the time we were speaking. I think we were talking about it. That's been also in a similar vein. That's been a way of both releasing our own music, but also obviously other people's, and creating an environment around that. Goodness knows what else, other stuff, no doubt.
Busy man.
That was quite a long answer, but it's just interesting to pull at the threads of
It
kind
is,
of.
it is, and there's so much for us to touch on here in terms of contribution from different angles, which I'm excited to dig into. There was clearly a big piece there around the EMOM and the promotion of nights, and something I'm very passionate about and I'm going to be doing here in the US is working with young people as well. Let's start with that, because the promoter side was one of the things that, and it actually ties into what you were talking about with the release as well, was something that had you immediately spring to mind amongst a whole host of other reasons when it came to us. Who did I want to talk to about contribution and what they do? And you've just listed so many things that you do, and I'm curious to explore it more, but I'm going to take your mind back only a short way to December. And we're on a mastermind call in the FMM Plus group. And I asked everybody to reflect back over the previous year and to share one thing that they'd accomplished, that they were extremely grateful that they'd accomplished. Now, a few days before that, you'd pinged me a message to let me know you had this release and you were really excited about it. It was a label that you listened to the music, you were over the moon. Oh, they're interested. They want to sign the music. And I was convinced that's what you were going to share. I was like, wow, it's such a big kind of breakthrough and something you're really excited about. And you didn't. You said instead, and I'm paraphrasing this, you said, what I'm most grateful for achieving this year is I ran 5 open mic nights in London. I found my tribe of people. I got to create special occasions for other people. I feel that we're starting a movement together. And you also referenced being able to give people the opportunity to perform and to get up there in that sort of supportive network. So in terms of contribution, it's clearly one of your top values. You know, I was convinced I knew what you were going to say, and then I went, oh, wasn't expecting that. Let's dive in a little bit more, if that's okay, around these nights. And what are the motivations and drivers for you for investing? Because everyone can hear from you sharing the things that you're doing. You're doing a lot. So
Hmm.
your time is important and it's precious. And I know you're involved in a lot of other things in your life. There's clearly a spotlight and an importance on this. What are the motivations and the drivers for you for being so heavily involved in doing this?
Um, it's a good question. I think the things I would put at the top in it are the energy. So taking positive energy from other people. Um, it's not, as a side note, that I'm necessarily extraordinarily extrovert. I don't, yeah, without getting into that, it's not about needing other people to validate me. It's more, I just get a lot of energy from people around a shared and common purpose. I think that's it. Right. That's the point. It's why I've always liked working in teams, um, and so on. So once I'd sort of, thanks to Martin and Darren, discovered the open mic movement, it felt to me like this is a purpose that I understand. Um, to enable performance, to create a safe space for people to explore their creativity, to enable people to perform for the first time or the 500th time, or whatever it is, and to do it in a way which is, what's the word? That is proper. That is, it's a great venue. It's the Dublin Castle, Amy Winehouse, Madness. They all played on that stage. So putting it on there is sort of creating that authenticity, and seeing what it means to people to get the opportunity to play there, um, and for them to see with us how possible it is for anybody to do it. You sort of you see barriers melt away for people with sudden realization that I can do this, and that the only things that can go wrong are in my head, and all of that stuff. And then to do that in a way which is an exciting night. I mean, the music is, to be clear, is utterly brilliant. I mean, you just see the most incredible things. And one of the characteristics that the night has developed, which sort of gives it an identity even within the open mic movement, I think, is that it has quite a strong performance element. So a lot of people who physically perform in some way, whether it's obvious things like singing or playing their instruments in a particular way, but also masked performance, video performance. So there's this really rich interdisciplinary and quite theatrical element to it. Um, so I think it comes from the energy that I take. I think all of us do doing this from a common purpose. Like, this is worth it. This is worth it. I mean, art means something to people who make it. Hopefully, means something to people who listen to it or watch it, and it matters. And if there's a space that people can come together and agree that it does matter while still having a really good time, then that feels worth it.
Have there been any surprising aspects to doing it? Things that you weren't expecting, maybe things that people have said to you. So to give you an example of what I'm thinking and what sort of brought this question to mind. When I first started FMM, it was all about helping people to unlock their creativity and to get past blocks and people who really wanted to write music but weren't able to do it.
Mm.
What I didn't expect was the messages of you've changed my life, and this now impacts how I show up to my family and to my work, and I've become I feel like I'm a more evolved human being and thing. And I was like, wow, I didn't expect that. And of course that's absolutely incredible. I wondered if there were any conversations you've had with people at the open mic nights or other nights you're putting on or even performing at that were
Yeah.
like, oh, I didn't perhaps realize it was this far reaching, or there's a different impact or benefit that has been uncovered here?
Yeah, I mean, lots of conversations of many kinds like that. I think one of the common themes that maybe I hadn't quite expected that sort of relates to my first points about shared purpose was the number of people who say, including me, wow, I've just made a lot of friends doing this. And coming back to the tribe piece, I didn't realize that there are so many people doing the same thing, all variations of I didn't know that or appreciate that I would fit, or that I was at a necessary standard. I think people, like we all do, will are concerned with sharing art. Anybody sharing art is concerned about or is faced with some sort of imposter syndrome. So there's all these people on the stage, and then I'm going to go on the stage, and then everyone's clearly going to laugh or go to the bar, which doesn't happen. And so the realization that actually you are that person, you are the person you watched. The first time you came and which a lot of people do, come and watch and say, as someone did last time. Um, I remember explicitly sort of tapped me on the shoulder and said, I've just been here the whole night. I was thinking I could come next time, but do I have to do an audition or how do I get to play? So you message me or Darren or somebody else here, or just turn up and, either you'll play that time or next time. Um, and, does it need to be a particular kind of me? Do I need to send you I think one person said, do I need to send you a show reel? And he said, well, if it was a promoted night, maybe, but it's not. That's the whole point, you know. I said, to be honest, mate, to this person, some of the people you've seen tonight had no idea till they got there what they were going to do. They just had their hit and started doing something, So yes, I think that's been surprising or certainly gratifying is the number of people who focused on that, but also on I've made some really good friends. I've met some amazing people. This has really given me, some of the other nights we promoted, people said this has given me a real sense of accomplishment, and a group of people to do that with. Because going back to, I think, a word I may have used earlier about gatekeepers, it's not to accuse any gatekeepers, promoters, labels, radio stations, whatever, but those barriers can seem utterly insurmountable to creatives. Well, that's just impossible. No one's going to want to see me play live or give me the opportunity to release music or collaborate with me. But of course, those things are possible for everybody. They are absolutely possible. And yeah, the realization that that's the case is really powerful.
Yeah, I was curious. That was sort of going to be my next question around the gatekeeper. So far we've already discussed the fact that this is building confidence in people. You've got the camaraderie, the friendship. There's the dropping down the gatekeepers. One thing I'm curious to explore as well is around your performance.
Mm.
Obviously, you had to do a first performance as well, and I'm imagining there was some imposter syndrome there. And so you do the performance and maybe another one. Perhaps I need to back up a little bit and let's flip this around because there's a couple of things I'm curious about. When you're performing now, are you aware of the contribution that you're having to other people by performing?
Um, I don't know. I think yes. Yeah, it's a really good question. And to yeah, and not that that's unique to me. I think that's true of every performer, that they are making a contribution by performing. By either the impact their art is having, or representing the taking the opportunity to do it. Now, both of those things are going on in the minds of hopefully people watching. So yes, no, I am probably more conscious that in the context of shared endeavor and community, um, there is real power in performance that is less. Yes, you're right. It's less about this is a thing that I'm going to do for which people happen to be present or not. And it's more about we're all in this room together and creating this moment. And you become much more conscious of that there's a contribution, just as, of course, the people watching, dancing, whatever they're doing, are contributing back. It is a collective experience. Even if it's quiet, there was the open, just as a story, for instance, there's the open mic nights are very lively. No, there's chit chat, there's people moving, catching up with each other while people are performing. That's all totally fine. There are people setting up where other people are performing. So it's informal, I think is the word. And that's a good thing, because formality is a barrier. And so informality definitely fosters expression. There's one performer who has played at a few open mics and is going to go on to big things. Her artist's name is Now Noise, and she creates Foley music and sings, and it is a remarkable artist. And the first time she played, I was standing with Darren, who's my co-host for most of them, and Martin sometimes. And he tapped me on the shoulder. He said, "Look at the room," and everybody had stopped talking, or moving around, or doing anything, and they were entranced, in that moment. Um, and that does happen too. There are moments of celebration and of wonder and surprise and laughter, and all of those things. So, and that's a contribution. She was making a huge contribution, in inspiring people. Basically, I think is part of your point. It is inspiring to see someone perform, and hopefully to do it yourself.
Yeah, I love that, because you've spoken about shared purpose, and now there's also this shared experience, which through her music, everybody is bonded in some way, whether they even knew it immediately, because a lot of this stuff is subconscious as well, which is
Absolutely.
is really interesting to me. And then the inspiration part, which I think is really important, and it's something that I think contribution is a superpower.
Mm.
And the more we deliberately bring it into our awareness, particularly when we have imposter syndrome and our ego is firing up in some way or some form, to be in service to others is one of the best ways I know of quietening the ego down. And as an example, a little bit meta on the podcast. I've had some, artists on the podcast, been very fortunate to have some about as big as it gets in our world of electronic music. And there have been times where I'm like 30 minutes coming up to the interview and the nerves start kicking in and I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to mess this up. Well. And the way to short circuit I found was really quite easy, which was to say to myself, well, hang on a minute. This is about them. It's not about me.
Mm.
How can I make this the best interview they've ever had? How can I make them the most comfortable? How can I help them to express themselves and say the things they really want to say, and ask interesting questions, and make them feel like this is a wonderful experience? the moment that that thinking comes in, the ego has nowhere to exist because the ego is concerned with self, and now it's all about other people. And I think that idea of inspiring is something that's really important as well on a number of different levels, because there's when one is frightened and scared and oh god, it's performing, and it's pretty damn nerve-wracking the first time you perform or you speak in public, whatever it might be. There is also, or there can be, the acknowledgement that by doing this, I'm helping to give other people who want to do this but are in their own way almost permission. They see me terrified going up there, and maybe they speak to me afterwards. Oh, that was really good. Oh my god, I was terrified, and they're like, maybe I can do this. So I think what you're doing with
Yes.
the EMOM nights and it's so far reaching. I mean, have you taken time to really unpack and think about the massive impact that you're getting to have through this?
Um, somewhat, yes. Like I said, the EMOM piece is obviously part of it. There are other performance things that we're doing, and packaging all those things together. Yes, I do. I do reflect on that and think about, and mostly that shows up as, where could this go? What can we do? Which is something we discuss, the team working on it, which is where the Arts Council application came from, which was one of my co-hosts' idea, Darren's idea. And what it's done is, as we've bounced ideas around, it's led both of us, all of us, to think about, where could this go? And not just this, but where could thinking about artistic communities, let's say in London, to give it some boundaries, but it doesn't have to be. Where could this go? What happens if you think about knitting together education, performance, social impact, and awareness, empowerment, personal action, self-determination, and you start to really think about all of those things. Where could this go? Where could it go in terms of education is definitely one, but also opportunity. Who could benefit from this opportunity? One of the other things that I do is, I do some work at the Roundhouse, the venue in London. I've done some mentoring there, and the Roundhouse, as well as being a terrific venue, is actually a charity. Its purpose is to foster creativity amongst 18 to 25-year-olds in London, particularly targeted at those who may not have access to either the equipment, the space, the time, to do it. And the Roundhouse is a whole separate thing. I'm not involved with what they do, but it makes you think, what are those opportunities, without, I think, overstretching it into some big sort of non-profit endeavor, but more about, what are the little connections you can make between what we're doing and what that person over there is doing? How could that work? So I think, yes, in answer to your question, I think that's how we think about the contribution, in a way, is what are you going to do with it? What do you do with this gift that is kind of been given to us to look after? Where could it go?
Love it. That leads me on to really nicely where I wanted to go next with this, which is networking
Mm,
and building contacts inside of the industry. It's super important, and again, I think it's somewhere where, of course, imposter syndrome flares up for a lot of people. Who am I to be sending my music to this label? Who am I to be reaching out to this person? Who am I to, and so on and so forth. And I've said this to you before, and it still holds true. I think, you know, I know you are the best networker I've ever met, bar none. It's something. It's a absolute superpower that you possess. And we've spoken about this on a number of occasions. And a big part of this is the two-way value exchange that you're looking at, which is, of course, there's something there that is causing you to want to network with a person, but you're also operating from a place of how can I help, not what's in it for me. There's that looking for shared purpose, values, etc., etc. I wonder if that's something you could speak a little bit more to, because it's something you do so well. And if you've got any advice for people who sort of struggle with confidence when it comes to reaching out and to being parts of communities and so on and so forth.
Well, thank you, by the way. That's very kind. Um, yeah, it's so the networking that I think comes from a couple of places. One is sort of temperamental and one is experience. So temperamentally, going back to something I said earlier, I take a lot of energy from interactions with other people, particularly if they're around something that feels like it has collective value. So I mean, good examples would be, in this world, in my art and creativity, is reaching out to potential mentors, um, but thinking about how might we work together to create something interesting, and how often people are interested in that. Because if you're a professional, then you probably do get quite often asked about, can you do something for me? Can you listen to my track? Or can you help me with this particular technical thing? Or can you introduce me to a label boss? And there are nice people out there who might try to do it. But if you frame the question as, here's something I'm thinking about that might be interesting, it could be a way of writing or performing or something. And I wonder if there's something that you'd ever be interested in discussing developing as an idea, then I think you're likely to get some really interesting responses. Some will be no response, but certainly, with people I've done shows with who are much more experienced than me in performing and so on, because you're putting an idea in their head. What if we brought these people together? Here's a venue that I happen to know that I think might be interested, and so on. So it stems from the same place, Keith. I think of being curious about other people, and not framing the interaction initially as, can you give me something? But more, if you have time, can you tell me something? Or would you have time to talk about this? Because I'm interested in the way you do it, which is different from, can you do this for me? It's much more about planting a seed of an idea and hopefully bringing something to them as well. We do that in people we've invited to come and play at some of the nights, people we've invited to the label. And sometimes you get a no, but sometimes you get a yes, because you're planting the seed of an idea. So I think I mean, I totally understand, because it happens to all of us, including me, thinking, why would that person talk to me? Or I'm not going to approach that label or that artist or that, that whoever. Um, but if you think about, one, how might I build or start to build a relationship with them rather than asking for something? So obvious ways with artists you admire is to focus on their art, not yours. Whether it's complimentary or whether it's asking questions about. It's amazing how often, if you even on something like Instagram, if you ask someone, I think this track is incredible. I was really wondering how you think about doing X. How often you get an answer, as opposed to, I think your track is brilliant. Can you listen to mine? because you probably wouldn't answer that. So, it's opening it up to being interested in them as a person, and then taking it from there, I think.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. My mind was sort of connecting some dots here of some of the things that we do where I hadn't necessarily considered that that's how we were leading with things. So, for example, getting guests on the
Mm.
show, a lot of the time that is about we don't just spam people and say, "Hey, would you come and be on the show?" There's a research element. I'm interested in talking to people who are doing something interesting creatively. What is it? What are they doing? What am I inspired by? What would I like to learn from them? And then, of course, it always helps. They have managers and so on, and seeing that the
Sure.
podcast has blown up to the size it has appeases them. But the actual artists themselves, if I'm able to lead with, I'm really interested in exploring this thing that you do, and I love that thing that you do, and it comes from that place of genuine authenticity as well. I think it hadn't really crossed my mind, but I think that's probably a big sort of part in why we get so many people saying yes, way more yeses than nos. And at first that
Right.
was a surprise to me, but now listening to you speak about it, it feels perhaps less surprising rather than, well, you'll be on my podcast. There was actually a genuine interest, and there it always is, in the person as a human being and what they're accomplishing, and the value that I place on them and what they have to say, and how I think that can impact the people who are listening to the show, which immediately goes back to that idea of contribution, because people do want to contribute, I find. And that leads me to the next question. You're involved in a lot of things now. I'm imagining you get quite a few people asking you for stuff. Can we do this? Can I contribute this?
Yeah.
Can you do that? How do you think and feel about that when people are reaching out to you asking for some sort of support, help, time, energy, effort, and so on? I know you're busy, so what's your thought process and how do you feel about it?
Yeah, that it's a great question, actually, because I think I do have an approach to that I've also used in, it's true in my professional life as well. I get, approaches for guidance, or to for a project or whatever. So whether it's in my creative life or my professional life, if someone approaches me in a genuine way, and most of them are, let's be clear, there's genuine approaches, either to work on something, or to the label, or to perform, or whatever it might be. Um, I think my first response is to make sure I understand what it is that they want. So not just the thing they're asking for, but the context. So I will always answer, so if someone says, I'd like to perform at one of the nights that you run, it'd be, so I might ask them. Actually, that's not a great example, because that's slightly more transactional. It might be someone who's asking, whether to collaborate on a musical project of some kind. So I think in fact, what I would always do, is just try to clarify where they are, where this fits in with the things that they're doing, what they want to get out of it. And to which then I will, either say, let's explore it and give ourselves X amount of time to kind of figure it out and see if it's going to work, or that's definitely not for me, but let me think about who might be able to help. And that's part of the networking, is to keep, you know, passing it forward, as it were, paying it forward, is keep it moving. Because if someone is genuinely asking a question, then they deserve an answer, of some sort or another. Almost always, almost always. And a lot of good things come from that, passing on to somebody else. This might be the right label, the right collaborator. This might be a great night for you to try out, whatever it might be. Rather than it being a yes or no, is to yes, it's about helping, obviously, but also there's benefit both ways. I make that connection, pass them on to somebody, recommend they might talk to someone else. That person then might recommend somebody back to me who's bang on exactly what I'm looking for as a collaborator. And that does happen. You get that virtuous circle of recommendation and understanding. So, yeah, I mean, most of the time I will find a way, albeit just an exchange of text messages, to figure out, what the person, because sometimes, this is certainly true professionally, the thing they're asking for is not the thing they're asking for. It may be they're not actually asking to collaborate. They're asking for, some insight into some particular facet of production, or they actually want to meet somebody that I know. That happens, which is fine, and so on, or get onto a label that I'm on, by collaborating with me. Just talk to the label owner. She's wonderful. I'll introduce you. So you don't need to go down the route of us collaborating. That isn't really what you are asking. So it's about, as you know well, it's about asking good questions and to figure out how you can really help, because by understanding what it is that the person is seeking.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And again, it's really interesting hearing you speak about operating from this place of how can I help, and then talking about it's the law of Einie, the law of reciprocity. And it's a curious thing that when we lead from a place of service, there is something that comes back to us, especially when we don't focus on the thing coming back to us, which again short circuits the ego.
Yeah.
And it's really that place of living outwards as to how can I help people, and then things just come together. And I think I may have mentioned this before on the podcast, but when I used to be in recruitment in London, and I left there as the highest billing consultant, and a big part of my secret to success was leading from how can I help, because it's sales and it's commission. But I never looked at it like that. I looked at it as from a place of this is somebody's life and this is somebody's business. And if I am shoehorning a person into a role, and believe me, you get given the toolkit to do that, you can really kind of manipulate is the true word, if you wanted to misuse the toolkit, and convince and so on and so forth, cajole people into a job that in your heart isn't the best career move for them. And maybe they're not really the perfect candidate for the company, and everybody's going to suffer here as a result of this.
Yeah.
And of course, there were lots of people who did this because they wanted the quick buck. And I never thought about it like that once. I always led from saying, I don't think this is the right role for you. Or on reflection, the more we get into this and you've interviewed and the noises I'm hearing back, why don't we hold off on this? And I would oftentimes lose out on them being placed. And maybe I'd say to a teammate, I think this person's going to be better suited to your role.
Yeah.
As a short game, that doesn't pay off. But on the medium to long term, I get to call everyone now and say, oh, do you know someone who could do this? Would you be able to give me a heads up on that? And all of a sudden, all these doors opened up. And I never knew that when I started the role, but that's how it played out. If I move us slightly again, because it's something that fascinates me about you, and that is, I know you're a member of multiple online communities. You're obviously a member of Finish More Music, a member of the Mastermind. Every community I see you in, you are a lead character in the community. You're not an NPC. You're sort of one of the core central people. How do you think about being a member of a community?
Yeah, good. I like that question. I think the themes are fairly consistent here. I think it has a lot to do with energy and obviously with contribution. But I think the other word that we haven't touched on is values. And I certainly try to um, to ensure that the way I behave in a community is consistent with my values. One of the things about online communities, it's not really true of Finish More Music, but it is certainly true of online interaction, is that it's easy to adopt a persona. And that can be quite helpful. Um, but if, and let's just use Finish More Music as the example, if my aim in being part of the community is to get value from it, obviously, part of the way I generate value for me is by generating as much value as I can for the community as a whole. And that's not about, I just, I want to be a nice person who's helping everybody. This is the way that it feels most worthwhile for everybody, is if there's a strong value around reciprocal help and information, and also a certain way of behaving as well, I think. So I think that's part of it. I also I guess if one is being kind of self-aware, there's a part of leading, if that is the right word, or engaging in a particular way that I enjoy. I do get sort of strength and energy from, okay, if this thing's going on, then let's see how we can make it the best it can be. And I'll throw myself into it. And if someone needs to throw some ideas out to get it moving or whatever, I'm happy to do that. Which makes it sound like, I want to make myself the main character. And I hopefully that's not the case. It's more about, it is more about enabling. It's a really good question. And online communities can be difficult places to be. And I just find that the easiest way to do it is to just stay fairly true to my core values, and to interact in a way that's fairly authentic. And FMM is certainly I think everybody does that. It's quite self-selecting as a community. You don't get very far if those aren't your values.
Yes, yeah, very true. And I love that when you said, let's make this the best it can be. I thought that was very cool. And, there's not, it never even crosses my mind that there's a instance of, oh, Mark's trying to be the main character. I'm incredibly grateful for you and, other members in the community who do lead by example, who are authentic. And you actually made me rethink about my role in mastermind groups that I'm a part of as well. Because you bring so much value to the group, I say made me, but I saw that and I considered and I thought, how can I plus one or plus
Mm.
two how I contribute to the mastermind groups that I'm a part of, not just for the members of the group, which is what I'd thought of previously, but also for the person running the group.
Yes.
And because I thought, how can I have that impact that makes their life easier? How can I contribute to, because whenever we're running anything, we, of course, for example, you running the EMOM nights, there's an element of it. You really want it to succeed. You want it to do well. You want things to and the people who are showing up, they get to contribute to how can it go well. And that can lead to all sorts of interesting questions, I think,
Mm.
around how can I connect people in the group? How can I be the person who makes new members who've just turned up feel comfortable and feel that they
Sure.
can express themselves and be heard? How can I ask questions? So that's something that often people think if I ask a question, it's all about me. Actually, no. Asking a
That's right.
question creates a discussion, it creates more interest, it gives the person who's in my case, let's say it's the mastermind group, the opportunity to coach and add value, which is one of the big drivers for why I want to do the thing in the first place. So actually, your leading by example led me in the things that I lead as well. If that makes sense. So
It
no,
does.
I
No,
think
great.
your contribution is absolutely wonderful. So let's wrap up as well with a little more from on the contribution side, but really look into the future now, because there's a project that you're starting to work on that I'm fascinated about, which is Substack, which is
Mhm.
coming up. In a, you know, you're sort of designing and you're thinking about that and how you're able to contribute on that platform. And a term that I've heard you use a great many times is building a community around my art.
Yeah.
So how are you thinking about Substack and what it can provide for others and what it can provide for you?
Um, yeah. So I've been thinking, as you know, I've been thinking for a while about ways of sharing and communicating and engaging with audiences, um, particularly in the environment that we're in around things like music streaming and so on, which are effective at one thing but very ineffective at building genuine engagement. And you know, as I've said, a lot of the energy that I get is from engagement. Um, so live performance is clearly one way of doing that, particularly as we've talked about a lot, generating, you know, nights, promoting nights and EMOMs and so on that create that engagement, by which I mean all the things we've talked about, a shared experience, which everybody contributes to a greater whole. Um, and I've been thinking about how can I sort of extend that um, to my own creativity and do something which perhaps will bring an engaged community together and will also provide opportunities for activity, for collaboration, or for shared experience of some kind. I don't know exactly what that will be. And I got very interested in Substack last year through some of the people that I follow. Um, and it felt like it was a platform, and I hope this stays the same, that has a level of authenticity and integrity to it that I think is founded primarily on honesty and quality. So a lot of the things that I was reading were basically very good. And unlike other social media, and it is effectively a social medium, were not performative. So it wasn't content created in order to present a particular person in a particular way, which, you know, has its place. Instagram's the obvious one, you know, highly performative. It's more about the quality of the ideas and the quality of the content and engagement. Um, and it seems to really suit, and it might simply because that's what I've gravitated to. Going back to the things I was talking about at the beginning, experimental um, and creative approaches to artistic expression, um, and criticism and reception. So I thought, that's interesting, and I love to write. So my aim at the moment, um, during the spring, is to launch a Substack, probably called Interference Patterns, which will be about um, my own creativity and musings therein, but also particularly exploring the interaction between artists and between different kinds of art. So interdisciplinary stuff, and how music can be inspired by other art forms and other art forms by music, and how music itself can generate in response to listening I'm really interested in the relationship between listening to music and making it. And if I can do that and bring people in around some sort of shared experiences that might be things that we do together, or ideas that people take and run with and do their own thing with, I'll see how that goes. But that's the idea, is to, and in doing so, to get closer to that notion of an engaged. And I think community is definitely a better word than audience. I mean, audience can feel like a passive. So that's a bunch of passive folk consuming what you do, and that's great. But this is as much about collective participation, and we'll see. It's like all these things. It's knowing that it might not work, and that would be okay. That makes it okay to start. There's no way I could know. I mean, it might be utterly terrible, and I hate doing it, and it doesn't. Well, that's fine. I'll move on to something else. That's okay. So it's part of exploration, I think, Keith. Right? It's just exploring what can I do with all of this stuff, and that's one way that I think I could move that forward.
Yeah, I'm dead excited about it. And if you hate it and you don't like it and you don't want to do it, then I think we'll have a long podcast series where we talk about the topics you're interested in. I've already said to you, I'm going to
That's
be
true.
hunting you down as much as possible with
Yeah.
the ideas that I've got for the direction of this podcast, because you think about these things deeply and you're involved in a lot of the things that I want to discuss coming up. But I'm really excited about it. I love how you think about music and creativity. So I'm absolutely subscribing to the Substack all day long and hoping that you
There you
enjoy it
go.
and don't hate it. Um, Before we sign off, what's coming up? What can people get involved in that you're doing? Live gigs they can attend, EMOMs. When's the release coming out? Is there a date slated for it yet? What
Yeah.
can we look forward to?
So the EP is out on. It's called Blank Time. It's out on March the 7th on Taipan Tracks. So I'm definitely excited about that. And interestingly, just as an aside, um, the label is really good at particularly things like building SoundCloud awareness around premieres and so on. And of all the kind of build-ups to a release I've had, this one has generated the most networks. It really, and of course I've jumped on them. So but other labels have been in touch and all of that stuff, which is all great. But it feels like I was right that this is the space that I'm comfortable in musically. So that's exciting. Um, in terms of gigs, so the EMOM Dublin Castle EMOM is once a month, first Wednesday of every month. Can find me on Instagram if anyone's interested in coming along and playing. And I'll introduce you to the gang. There's also, and we can put them in show notes, there's an EMOM newsletter, which kind of keeps people worldwide up to date with what's happening in the electronic music open mic movement. So that might be a link for us to drop in. I'm actually playing at the next one with Dave Norman. And then he and I have got a gig on May the 16th at the Temple of Art and Music in Elephant and Castle in London, along with a bunch of fun people like Ned Rush, who some people might know from YouTube. So that, yeah, we're looking forward to that. And then possibly there's some open mics type festival things that are brewing. So I'll just say, watch this space. But there's definitely potential to do some quite interesting day-long events around some of this stuff. So yeah, fingers crossed.
Loads going on, and we'll absolutely put all the links in the show notes for everyone. And it was funny because we had a little bit before we started recording, a little bit of a discussion about how much you do and how do you fit it all in, and spreading yourself too thin, and various things like that, which I think we're going to have to do an episode on that together, because I find it hard to imagine that somebody listening to this episode isn't thinking, how on earth does this man get this stuff done? Like, can you just ask him that question? And like, yes, you can tell there'll be a lot to unpack there. So it's a separate episode. Mark, thank you so much for coming back on the show. I was excited to talk to you, and as always, you've over delivered on my expectations, which are always high for learning from you, and you sharing your experiences and how you're thinking about contributing and all of the different things you do and the impact it has for you and for others. So huge thank you, and we'll absolutely get you on the show again soon.
Can't wait. No, thank you. It's always a huge pleasure. So, yeah, thanks very much.